Oh, thank you all for coming today. Today we're going to be looking at chapter 20 and 26 from this book. I'll just briefly mention this in Korean. 오늘은 우리가 20장, 231쪽하고 26장, 265쪽으로 좀 보겠습니다. So 20하고 26. And like I said, we're looking at chapter 20 and 26 in this edition. But in kind of some good news, so this is for people who are watching this who don't live in Korea. If you live in Korea, we can get this to you. It's a little bit difficult and we have to do some workarounds, but we can get it to you. But now, if you live outside Korea, you can order a paper copy, if you like, from Amazon. So, the Diamond Sutra, The World as an Interconnected Whole, Sun Master Daehaeng, it's on Amazon, and it's through their print-on-demand system. And the interior, as you can see, is actually quite nice. And for this edition, we used the Kumarajiva's Chinese edition, Daehaeng Sunim's Korean edition, and the English translation. So if you live outside Korea, you can get this edition. There's also an ebook edition that's just the English and the Korean, because ebooks don't work out you can't do a parallel layout like this with ebooks. So that's available if you're interested. Not you all here today, but. All right, so we're on the last 12 chapters of the Diamond Sutra, and a lot of these chapters are very short. Like some of them are just one page, and they're kind of a curious mixture of things that are going on. And one of the things is that chapter 20 and 26 talk about not being able to perceive. Here they use the word tathagata, but you could say one mind. You could say the enlightened mind through the physical aspects. And it's kind of an interesting situation. Let me go ahead and take a look at chapter 20, Breaking Away from Appearances and Perceptions. And it starts out very straightforward. So on page 233, what do you think, Subhuti? Can you look at a Buddha and see the physical manifestation of Tathagata? No, world-honored one. Tathagata cannot be perceived by means of physical form or appearance. What people think of as the appearance of Tathagata is not the complete appearance that Tathagata speaks of. It is called the complete appearance of Tathagata because Tathagata manifests in every kind of way according to the need. Subhuti, do you think there are concepts or awareness that would allow someone to recognize Tathagata? Then, no, world-honored one. If someone wants to know Tathagata, they cannot do so through their ideas or perceptions of its apparent characteristics. For the manifested aspects of Tathagata are not the essence of Tathagata. Those are just called the complete manifestations of Tathagata because Tathagata responds fully and perfectly to all beings. And if you're looking at the book, there's a footnote here where we explain perfectly. Because perfect is perfectly suitable to your situation, to your level of karma, to your level of understanding, to your whatever circumstances you're in. If you Daehaeng Sunim said a few times in her Dharma talks, now I'm allowed to tell you, which I always thought was an unusual expression. But one of the things about the sutras and the teachings and stuff like this is that there's a lot of things where if you tell people them, they'll be like, oh, I got that, I know that. And they get really locked into your explanation as I know that now, which is not the same thing as having experienced that and being able to actually see that for themselves. Because if you can see that, if that's your experience, then you adjust your behavior, you adjust your reactions accordingly. But if it's just something you picked up from somebody else, you tend not to do that. There's lots of times when you overlook that, where it's not a real thing yet. So from the way Daehaeng Sunim phrased it, she almost kind of implied that there are lots of things that it's best not to tell people. If you tell them too much, if you tell them more than what's relevant to them where they are, it actually does harm to them. She told me one time, I was going around and I'd heard a story that she said, and so I was going around, and every time I saw an animal or something in a bad situation, like we have a big road here in front of the Anyang Center, and occasionally you'd see a truckload of pigs going north up into Seoul. There's no farms north of here in Seoul. There's only factories, no farms. So those pigs were at the end of their rope, so to speak. So I'd raise a thought and say, okay, may you leave your body without any suffering. May you leave your body without pain. May you be and I was saying, may you be reborn as a human being. Well, I was just doing this. I wasn't telling anybody I was doing this. And not long afterwards, I had a chance to meet Sunim about something. And she just, out of the blue, she just said, if you're seeing other beings, don't think, may you be reborn as a human being. Think, may you be reborn as high as you can, at the highest level you can. Because if you push a person, a life too far, and they're like, all right, let's do that. And then they're reborn at a level that's too high for them. Everything's difficult and painful and awkward for them. And if it's too overwhelming, they can't grow. So she's made a point of, help them get to the level that's most appropriate to them. I think it's the same thing with the response of Tathagata. Tathagata responds as suited as best to their circumstances. And that's why they use the word perfectly, not because it magically fixes everything for us. And so this chapter, it says you can't see Tathagata. You could say one mind. You could say the enlightened mind through appearances. And then we don't see anything about appearances in particular until chapter 26 on page 265. So on chapter 265, all of a sudden, again we see, the title chapter of 26 is, The Manifestations of Tathagata Do Not Have Fixed Form. And it's really similar to what we saw on chapter 20, but with 5 chapters between it. It doesn't come back to the topic. So for 5 chapters, the Buddha talks about things in a little bit different way. Then he comes back to chapter 26 on page 267 and says, Subhuti, what do you think? Can Tathagata be recognized by things like the 32 aspects? And Subhuti answers, no. Tathagata cannot be recognized by means of manifestations such as the 32 aspects. The Buddha said, Subhuti, if the 32 aspects indicated someone was Tathagata, you could claim that even the leader of a country was Tathagata. Subhuti spoke to the Buddha, World Honored One, hearing this, I am certain that it is not through manifestations or features such as the 32 aspects that Tathagata can be known. Well, so The 32 aspects showed up earlier in this book, but just to give you a refresher, these are characteristics in traditional Indian Buddhism and maybe Indian religion about, how can you tell a holy person or how can you tell an enlightened person? And so there are characteristics like, I think 33 teeth. I don't remember the exact number of teeth, but long fingers, right? Long earlobes. The head had a certain shape, and a pleasing body odor, and things like this. These were the if a holy person, if someone had these, then that indicated they were a holy person. And it's kind of on the one hand, it's kind of comforting because, oh, he's got long earlobes. He must be somebody really special, right? But it's a little bit of a risky investment there to decide that somebody's worth following because they have long fingers or funny ears. And I honestly, from what this is saying, there's no relationship. Maybe there is some sort of a connection, but I don't know. But if you're, how this ties into, well, next week we'll talk about these middle chapters, 21 through 25. But the aspect they're saying is you can't recognize this enlightened mind. It's nothing you can grab onto. It's all the non-dual functioning of everything as one whole. So there's no piece you can pull out and say, it's like trying to take a chunk out of a living animal and say, this is a cow, right? And it's like, the cow is over here, you can't do that. It's just the whole thing is the living whole. And there's no concept, there's no temporary manifestation, there's no, no aspect that you can label and say, this represents the whole, because it's all part of the whole. And so chapters 21 through 25 are really pointing us that way. And then in chapter 26, the Buddha drops these 32 aspects again. I think that's an indication of how big of an influence these had on people. Where, because I will bet you that if you want to carve a Buddha statue, if you want to make a Buddha statue, there's probably a traditional list of features you're supposed to have. The head's supposed to look like this. The eye, and it's not, I was going to say it's not carved in stone, but it actually might be carved in stone. But it's more of a tradition. This is, a Buddha is supposed to have these characteristics. And right here, Kunsim's saying, Diamond Sutra saying, is like, no. You can't know this whole through one limited aspect. If you mistake one aspect for the whole, you're making a mistake, and it's going to get you into trouble. If you follow somebody because they have funny shaped ears, it could go badly for you. There's a funny thing about the original manuscript that Daehaeng Sunim wrote about this. In her original draft, she said even the president of a country could be considered Tathagata. Well, Korea has a president, right? But some other countries have prime ministers, and when this was prepared to be published, they asked Kunsim if they could change it to the original. In the Korean, it says one of the Indian kings of that era. And they asked Kunsim if they could change it from president to this king's name that the traditional text has, because president was a little bit too shocking, a little bit too out of context. And so when we, I was aware of that story, so when we did the English translation, I just changed it to the leader of a country. Because if you think about it, these 32 aspects, they had a physical aspect, and they had, in some commentary, they had like a non-physical or a power aspect. So somebody with long earlobes, the physical aspect was the long earlobes, but the power, I guess, aspect was the ability to hear anything, anywhere. And so long fingers, was the unseen ability was the ability to reach out and touch things and to affect things anywhere. A pleasing body odor was reflected as charisma. And so deeper commentaries focused on these aspects. But, Sunim makes the point here that you just described any popular politician, right? Somebody's got a lot of charisma. Somebody, if you have in Korea, I don't think we call them the KCIA anymore. Just, I don't know what. Yeah, they don't use KCIA. In America, you have the CIA, or I don't know what Britain uses, James Bond, where you can use microphones to hear something somewhere else, or the president says, get rid of this guy, and something bad happens to somebody in a different country. This kind of power, you could attribute the same power as these 32 aspects to any powerful politician. And nobody is going to look at most politicians and say, oh, this must be an awakened holy being, right? It's just somebody with power and authority, not any deep connection. So, and by the time we get to chapter 26, the Buddha's been explaining how Tathagata is this non-dual oneness. So when people are have this desire to see things in these nice, clean categories, by the time they get here, now they're already convinced that, oh, right, that's not the way to do it. It doesn't take much to bring them around and say, oh, right, I gotta stop getting caught up in that stuff. Okay. All right. That's basically it for today. Today's a pretty short discussion, but it's the relevance for us is everybody here today, at least in person, is a little bit older. So I think by this point in our lives, most of us have learned that appearances aren't necessarily what you can trust, right? Just because somebody is good looking or not good looking, that doesn't actually mean anything about their characteristics or about their quality as a person. Likewise, it's always kind of a problem because people, how do you know what to trust, right? How do you know who you can trust? And if somebody's lying, they'll say the same thing as somebody who's not lying. So which one's lying? Is one of them lying? And a lot of times you can't really know. Inside, so outside, look at how somebody's actions have turned out. Ignore their words and just see how the things they've done have turned out. If they always turn out a certain unpleasant way, then learn to ignore the words they're saying. If the things they do kind of always tend to turn out okay, then even though you don't quite understand where they're coming from, you can usually trust them. We work on, in addition to just spiritual practice, I help with the publishing and the translation of Daehaeng Sim's talks. And we're fortunate that we have a really good team. And one of the funny things about our team is that if they all think they all have really different personalities, but if they all think something's a good idea and they want to try it, even though I don't understand how that's a good idea, like, okay, let's try that. Let's see what happens. And it never is a disaster. It may not work quite as well as we wanted, but it always comes out okay. And so you get to the point with people where you can look at their actions. How do their actions turn out? And that gives you a good way to respond. But that's always good to combine with asking inside, because our fundamental nature is connected to everyone else, is connected to everything else. And so if I ask inside, what should I do about this? How should I do this? Can I trust this person? Sometimes you don't really get a strong response one way or the other. And frankly, that might mean either way is okay, right? A little bit better, a little bit worse, doesn't really matter much. Sometimes you get a really strong feeling one way or the other, like turn around and run away right now, kind of a thing. Other times, this is the way to go, this is great. But even if you get an answer from inside, entrust that back again. One of the things that Sunim talked about was just because you feel something from inside, just because you hear something from inside, don't instantly follow it because it comes out from inside, right? If you heard a voice inside say, hey, do this, it might be your true self telling you something, but it could also be some old piece of karma, or maybe the spirit of somebody who passed away trying to say something. And you don't want to just follow it because it came out from inside. So even if it comes out from inside, entrust that back again and use your own good judgment. Oh, he's a rotten person, kill him. Like, wait a minute here, that doesn't sound like, that doesn't sound like what Sunim would say or do or anything like that. So let's better let that go back inside again. Right. The other option, the other alternative, and Daehaeng Sunim gives this idea in the very opening poem that she wrote for this book, where she said, actually, let me find that real quick. Right, on page 25. This is one of my favorite poems by her, to be honest. The Korean is really nice. The Korean's got a really nice rhythm to it and everything. And 이제 25쪽 보시면. And the English is okay, but it's not quite as nice as Korean. Take this path and everything is working together as one. Take that path and everything still works together as one. So no matter which way we go, everything in this world is working together as one. So if I'm in a situation and it doesn't feel like it's going well, or it feels dangerous or something, entrust the thought, okay, this is coming from you, so you're the one that's got to make this work out well for everybody. And turn that around and trust that back again. All right, everything is part of this whole. So since this too is part of this whole, fix this and let's have a little more harmonious response here. Because one of the questions is, well, if everything's working together as one whole, why is there so much unpleasantness in the world, right? Why is there so much unpleasantness in my own life or difficulties in my own life? Well, one of the difficult answers is it's because that's the way I input it. That's the way I entrusted it. I didn't know I was doing it that way. I didn't know I was setting things up like that, but I set things up in a dualistic way. My thinking or my viewpoint or something was very one-sided. It wasn't very harmonious. And now I'm getting the results of that. And I'm not happy with the results of that. But at some point, the way I was reacting to things, even if I didn't know it was harmful, I'm getting the results of that as they've mixed in with everything else and eventually come back out. And so, but on the plus side, because what I'm getting is the reaction to what I've done, I now have the ability to change that too. Just because it's unpleasant right now doesn't mean I'm stuck with that, right? All right, hey, let's try to do things a little more harmoniously. Let's try to view things more wisely. Let's try to live without pain and suffering. What do I have to do? How do I have to live to make that happen? And then input that, and then see what comes back out. But because everything's reacting as part of one whole, I can change the direction things are going. I can change the direction my things are going, for the most part, right? I can't make you do what I want you to do. I can't make you do what I think you should do. Because a lot of that's my own fixed idea. And other people are, even if they're behaving badly, that's their path of learning, right? Unfortunately, they may have to stumble and fall a few times to pick this up, but I can't do that for them, right? So there's a definite limit to, I can turn on the lights, I can turn on the heat, I can make sure you get a nice meal, but the learning part, other people have to do for themselves. So it's always we always talk about this sometimes, but when we raise an intention for somebody's well-being and entrust that, you want to be careful that we're not forcing them into our own fixed idea of what they should do. You should do it this way. Well, if they have an idea of how they want to do it, they really want to do it this way, and I'm trying to, they want to go this way and I'm trying to pull them this way, then what happens is it gives rise to resentment. Without any understanding why, they begin to resent me. Like I walk into a room and they're like, oh, that guy. And this really happens. And I think I've said this before to this group, but it's the same thing with kids. You must do your homework. I think you should be, it's kind of a joke among Korean Americans, Asian Americans. But, if you asked Asian American or Asian immigrant parents what they wanted for their child, it's like doctor, lawyer, kind of a thing. Doctor, lawyer, professor, yeah. And, I want to work in construction. No, shut up. Right? I want to run a nursery, and parents are like, no. And so sometimes parents can really, even if they're not saying it, just through mind, do it this way. And if it's not somebody else's path, it just creates resentment because everybody's on their own path for learning. And so you have to be a little bit wise or gentle about how you react to that. And so instead of trying to force them down your path, the path you would take if it was your choice, help them, to do things wisely, to do things warmly. It's like, okay, if you want to go that way, but try to see everything non-dually. Try to treat everybody as if they were yourself. Try to live kindly and encourage them that way and support them that way. And then, like I said, it's not your path, but hopefully they'll have a smoother time of it that way. All right, I'll go ahead and stop here for today, and we'll break up into small group for discussion. Thank you.